Here we go again. This and that should be fine. Okay, let us continue with the read through of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Hopefully, I marked it well. Okay. Um, has to be. Okay. The Garden of Eden. Remember, as discussed earlier, that the Genesis stories were amalgamated from several sources. After the newer priestly story, Genesis 1, recounting the emergence of order from chaos, comes the second, even more ancient, Yahwist? Yeah, I think. Okay, I don't know how to read it. Even more ancient part, beginning essentially with Genesis 2. This account, which uses the name Yahweh to represent God, contains the story of Adam and Eve, along with a much fuller explication of the events of the sixth day alluded to in the previous priestly story. The continuity between the stories appear to be the result of careful editing by the person or persons known signally to biblical scholars as the redactor, who wove the stories together. This may have occurred when the peoples of two traditions united, for one reason or another, and the subsequent illogic of their meddled stories growing together over time in an ungainly fashion bothered someone conscious, courageous, and obsessed with coherence. Uh, Okay, I respect Peterson's point of view, which is, but I'm kind of bothered that how evolutionary it is. According to the Yahwist's creation story, God first created a bounded space known as Eden, which in Aramaic, Jesus's putative language, means a well watered place or paradise. Um, okay, let's skip this one. Which means which means walled or protected enclosure or garden. Yeah, an old Iranian? Oh boy. Okay. God placed Adam in there, along with all manner of fruit bearing trees, two of which were marked out. One of these was the tree of life, the other, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, kudos for presenting its full name. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay. God then told Adam to have his fill of fruit as he wished, but added that the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was forbidden. After that, he created Eve as a partner for Adam. Or, in other interpretation, he split the original androgynous individual into two parts, male and female. According to this line of thinking, Christ, the second Adam, is also the original man before the sexual subdivision. The symbolic meaning of this should be clear to those who have followed the argument thus far. Adam and Eve don't seem very conscious at the beginning when they are first placed in paradise, and they were certainly not self-conscious. As the story insists, the original parents were naked but not ashamed. Such phrasing implies first that it's perfectly natural and normal for people to be ashamed of their nakedness. Otherwise, nothing would have to be said about its absence. Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would, because this the shame of nakedness is what we have now, and what is being fought against in our culture. In a very wrong manner. And second, that there was something amiss, for better or worse, with our first parents. Although there are exceptions, the only people around now who would be ashamed of suddenly dropped naked. Although there are exceptions, the only people around now who would be ashamed if suddenly dropped naked into a public space, excepting the odd exhibitionists, are those younger than 3 years are those younger than 3 years of age. Who would be unashamed? Sorry. Let me let me read this again. Although there are exceptions, the only people around now who would be unashamed if suddenly dropped naked into a public place, excepting the old exhibitionist, are those younger than 3 years of age. In fact, a common nightmare involves the sudden appearance of the dreamer naked on a stage in front of a packed house. In the third chapter of Genesis, a serpent appears, first apparently in legged form. God only knows why he allowed or placed such a creature in the garden. I have long puzzled over the meaning of this. It seems to be a reflection in part of the order chaos dichotomy characterizing all of experience, with paradise serving as habitable order and the serpent playing the role of chaos. The serpent in Eden, therefore, means the same thing as the black dot in the yang side of the Taoist yin yang symbol of totality. That is, the possibility of the unknown and revolutionary suddenly manifesting itself where everything appeals calm. Mm, yeah, I should be checking this all the time. It does not appear possible, even for God himself, to make a bounded space completely protected from the outside. Not in the real world, with its necessary limitations surrounded by the transcendent. The outside, chaos, always sneaks into the inside, because nothing can be completely walled off from the rest of reality. So even the ultimate in safe spaces inevitably harbors a snake. There were, however, genuine. What? Quotidian? Reptilian snakes in the grass and in the trees of our original African paradise. Uh, Even had all of those been banished, however, in some inconceivable manner by some primordial Saint George, snakes would have still remained in the form of our primordial human rivals, at least when they were acting like enemies from our limited in-group kin-bonded perspectives. There was, after all, no shortage of conflict and warfare among our ancestors, tribal or otherwise. And even if we had defeated all the snakes that beset us from within, no, from without, reptilian or and human alike, we would still not have been safe, nor are we now. We have seen the enemy after all, and he is us. The snake inhabits each of our souls. This is the reason, as far as I can tell, for the strange Christian insistence made most explicit by John Milton that the snake in the Garden of Eden was also Satan, the spirit of evil itself. The importance of the symbolic identification, its staggering brilliance, can hardly be overstated. It is through such millennia-long exercise of the imagination that the idea of abstracted moral concepts themselves, with all they entail, developed. Work beyond comprehension was invested into the idea of good and evil and its surrounding, dreamlike metaphor. The worst of all possible snakes is the eternal human proclivity for evil. The worst of all possible snakes is psychological, spiritual, personal, internal. These are not all the same, or not even existing on the same level, but never mind for now. No walls, however tall, will keep that out, even if the fortress were thick enough. In principle, to keep everything bad whatsoever outside, it would immediately appear again within. As the great Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn insisted, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. There is simply no way to wall off some isolated portion of the greater surrounding reality and make everything permanently predictable and safe within it. Some of what has been, no matter how carefully excluded, will always sneak back in. A serpent, metaphorically speaking, will inevitably appear. Even the most assiduous of parents cannot fully protect their children, even if they lock them in the basement, safely away from drugs, alcohol, and internet porn. In that extreme case, the too cautious, too caring parent merely subsidize him or herself for the other terribly problems of life. This is the great Freudian Oedipal nightmare. It is far better to render beings in our care competent than to protect them. Okay, hold on for a second. I need to write down a new word. Oh boy, I'm learning so much. ASSIDUOUS. Okay, something to check later. And even if it were possible to permanently banish everything threatening, everything dangerous, and therefore everything challenging and interesting, that would mean only that another danger would emerge, that of permanent human infantilism and absolute uselessness. How could the nature of man ever reach its full potential without challenge and danger? How dull and contemptible would we become if there was no longer reason to pay attention? Maybe God thought his new creation would be able to handle the serpent and considered its presence the lesser of two evils. Sounds likely to me. Uh, Question for parents. Do you want to make your children safe or strong? In any case, there's a serpent in the garden, and he is a subtle beast, according to the ancient story. Difficult to see, vaporous, cunning, deceitful, and treacherous. It therefore comes as no surprise when he decides to play a trick on Eve. Why Eve instead of Adam? It could just be chance. It was 50-50 for Eve, statistically speaking, and those are pretty high odds. But I have learned that these old stories contain nothing superfluous. Anything accidental, anything that does not serve the plot, has long been forgotten in the telling. As the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov advised, if there is a rifle hanging on the wall in Act 1, it must be fired in the next act. Otherwise, it has no business being there. Perhaps primordial Eve had more reason to attend to serpents than Adam. Maybe they were more likely, for example, to prey on the tree-dwelling infants. On her tree-dwelling infants. Perhaps it is for this reason that Eve's daughters are more protective, self-conscious, fearful, and nervous to this day, even, especially in the most egalitarian of modern human societies. In any case, the serpent tells Eve that if she eats the forbidden fruit, she won't die. Instead, her eyes will be opened. She will become like God, knowing good from evil. Of course, the serpent doesn't let her know she will be like God only in that one way. But he is a serpent after all. Being human and wanting to know more, Eve decides to eat the fruit. Poof! She wakes up. She's conscious, or perhaps self-conscious, for the first time. Now, no clear-seeing, conscious woman is going to tolerate an unawakened man. So Eve immediately shares the fruit with Adam. That makes him self-conscious. Little has changed. Women have been making men self-conscious since the beginning of time. They do this primarily by rejecting them, but they also do it by shaming them if men do if men do not take responsibility. Since women bear primarily sorry. Since women bear the primary burden of reproduction, it's no wonder. It is very hard to see how it could be otherwise. But the capacity of women to shame men and render them self-conscious is still a primal force of nature. Mhm. Now we may ask, what in the world have snakes got to do with vision? Well, first, it's clearly of some importance to see them, because they might prey on you, particularly when you're little and live in trees like our arboreal ancestors. Dr. Lynn Isbell, professor of anthropology and animal behavior at the University of California, has suggested that the stunningly acute vision almost uniquely possessed by human beings was an adaptation forced on us tens of millions years ago by the necessity of detecting and avoiding the terrible danger of snakes with whom our ancestors co-evolved. Hmm. This is perhaps one of the reasons the snake features in the Garden of Paradise as the creature who gave us the vision of God, in addition to serving as the primordial and eternal enemy of mankind. No, it's not. This is perhaps one of the reasons why Mary, the eternal archetypal mother, Eve perfected, is so commonly shown in medieval and Renaissance iconography, holding the Christ child in the air as far as possible from a predatory reptile, which she has firmly pinned under her foot. No, the iconography stems from what Bible says, so and the Christian tradition. Ah, yeah, yeah, it's not easy to. Even though I generally agree with Dr. Peterson and admire the fact that he is able, from his perspective, see some very important things. I still cannot agree with everything he says, which is good. Okay, back to the reading. And there is more. It's fruit that the snake offers, and fruit is also associated with a transformation of vision. In that our ability to see color as an adaptation that allows us to rapidly detect the ripe and therefore edible bounty of trees. Our primordial parents hearkened to the snake. They ate the fruit. Their eyes opened. They both awoke. You might think, as Eve did initially, that this would be a good thing. Sometimes, however, half a gift is worse than none. Adam and Eve wake up, all right, but only enough to discover some terrible things. First, they notice that they are naked. Hmm. Nope, 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 nope. Yeah, there's for people. The naked ape. My son figured out that he was naked well before he was 3. He wanted to dress himself. He kept the washroom door firmly shut. He didn't appear in public without his clothes. I couldn't for the life of me see how this had anything to do with his upbringing. It was his own discovery, his own realization, and his own choice of reactions. Yes, it looked built in to me. What does it mean to know yourself naked, or potentially worse, to know yourself and your partner naked? All manner of terrible things expressed in the rather horrifying manner, for example, of the Renaissance painter Hans Baldung Green, whose painting inspired the illustration that begins this chapter. Naked means vulnerable and easily damaged. Naked means subject to judgment for beauty and health. Naked means unprotected and unarmed in the jungle of nature and man. This is why Adam and Eve became ashamed immediately after their eyes were opened. They could see, and what they first saw was themselves. Their faults stood out. Their vulnerability was on display. Unlike other mammals, whose delicate abdomens are protected by the armor like expanse of their backs, they were upright creatures with the most vulnerable parts of their body presented to the world. And worse was to come. Adam and Eve made themselves loincloths in the International Standard Version, aprons in the King James Version, right away to cover up their fragile bodies and to protect their egos. Then they promptly skittered off and hid. In their vulnerability, now fully realized, they felt unworthy to stand before God. If you can't identify with that sentiment, you're just not thinking. Beauty shames the ugly, strength shames the weak, death shames the living, and the ideal shames us all. Thus, we fear it, resent it, even hate it. And of course, that's the theme next examined in Genesis in the story of Cain and Abel. What are we to do about that? Abandon all ideals of beauty, health, brilliance, and strength? That's not a good solution. That would merely ensure that we would feel ashamed all the time, and that we would even more justly deserve it. I don't want women who can stand by their mere presence to disappear just so that others can feel unself-conscious. I don't want intellect such as John for Newman to vanish just because my barely grade 12 grasp of mathematics. By the time he was 19, he had redefined the numbers. Numbers! Thank God for John for... No, that's not Newman. For Neumann. Sorry. Thank God for Grace Kelly and Anita Ekberg and Monica Bellucci. I'm proud to feel unworthy in the presence of people like that. It's the price we all pay for aim, achievement, and ambition. But it's also no wonder that Adam and Eve covered themselves up. The next part of the story is downright farcical, in my opinion, although it's also tragic and terrible. That evening, when Eden cools down, God goes out for his evening stroll, but Adam is absent. This puzzles God, who is accustomed to walking with him. Adam calls God, apparently forgetting that he can see through bushes. Only apparently. Okay. Where are you? Adam immediately reveals himself, but badly. First as a neurotic, then as a rat thing. The creator of all the universe calls, and Adam replies, I heard you, God, but I was naked and hid. What does this mean? It means that people, unsettled by their vulnerability, eternally fear to tell the truth, to mediate between chaos and order, and to manifest their destiny. In other words, they are afraid to walk with God. That's not particularly admirable, perhaps, but it's certainly understandable. God's a judgmental father. His standards are high. He is hard to please. Okay, let's... God says, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat something you weren't supposed to? And Adam, in his wretchedness, points right at Eve, his love, his partner, his soulmate, and snitches on her. Then he blames God. He says, the woman whom you gave to me, she gave it to me, and then I ate it. How pathetic and how accurate. First woman made the first man self-conscious and resentful. Then the first man blamed the woman. And then the first man blamed God. This is exactly how every spurned male feels to this day. First, he feels small in front of the potential object of his love. after she denigrates his reproductive suitability. And he curses God for making her so bitchy, himself so useless, if he has any sense, and being itself so deeply flawed. Then he turns to thoughts of revenge. How thoroughly contemptible and how utterly understandable. At least the woman had the serpent to blame, and it later turns out that the snake is Satan himself, unlikely as that seems. Thus, we can understand and sympathize with Eve's error. She was deceived by the best, but Adam? No one forced his words from his mouth. Unfortunately, the worst isn't over. For man or beast. First, God curses the serpent, telling him that he will now have to slither around, legless, forever in peril of being stomped by the angry humans. Second, he tells the woman that she will now bring forth children in sorrow and desire an unworthy, sometimes resentful man who will in consequence lord her biological fate over her permanently. What might this mean? It could just mean that God is a patriarchal tyrant, as politically motivated interpretations of the ancient story insist. I think it's merely descriptive, merely. And here is why. As human beings evolved, the brains that eventually gave rise to self-consciousness expanded tremendously. This produced an evolutionary arms race between fetal head and female pelvis. The female graciously widened her hips almost to the point where running would no longer be possible. The baby, for its part, allowed himself to be born more than a year early compared to other mammals of his size and evolved a semi-collapsible head. This was and is a painful adjustment for both. The essentially fetal baby is almost completely dependent on his mother for everything during that first year. Excuse me. The programmability of this massive brain of his massive brain means that he must be trained until he is 18 or 30 before being pushed out of the nest. This is to say nothing of the woman's consequential pain in childbirth and high risk of death for mother and infant alike. This all means that women pay a high price for pregnancy and child rearing. Rearing? Not bearing? Okay, never mind. Particularly in the early stages, and that one of the inevitable consequences is increased dependence upon the sometimes unreliable and always problematic good graces of man. After God tells Eve what is going to happen, now that she has awakened, he turns to Adam, who, along with his male descendants, doesn't go off any easier. God says something akin to this: Man, because you attended to the woman, your eyes have been opened. Your godlike vision granted to you by snake, fruit, and lover allows you to see far, even into the future. But those who see into the future can also eternally see trouble coming, and must then prepare for all contingencies and possibilities. To do that, you will have to eternally sacrifice the present for the future. You must put aside pleasure of security. In short, you will have to work. And it's going to be difficult. I hope you're fond of thorns and thistles because you are going to grow a lot of them. Okay, that's an interesting interpretation. And then God banishes the first man and the first woman from paradise out of infancy. out of the unconscious animal world into the horrors of history itself. And then he puts cherubim and a flaming sword at the gate of the Eden, just to stop them from eating the fruit of the tree of life. That in particular appears rather mean spirited. Why not just make the poor humans immortal right away? Particularly if that is your plan for the ultimate future anyway, as the story goes. But who would dare to question God? Perhaps heaven is something you must build, and immortality something you must earn. Yeah, he really has to research this part better. And so we return to our original query. Why would someone buy prescription medication for his dog and then so carefully administer it when he would not do the same for himself? Now we have the answer derived from one of the foundational texts of mankind. Why should anyone take care of anything as naked, ugly, ashamed, frightened, worthless, cowardly, resentful, defensive, and accusatory as a descendant of Adam? Even if that thing, that being, is himself. And I do not mean at all to exclude women with this phrasing. All the reasons we have discussed so far for taking a dim view of humanity are applicable to others as much as to the self. They are generalizations about human nature, nothing more specific. But you know so much more about yourself. You're bad enough as other people know you. But only you know the full range of your secret transgressions, insufficiencies, and inadequacies. No one is more familiar than you with all the ways your mind and body are flawed. No one has more reason to hold you in contempt, to see you as pathetic. And by withholding something that might do you good, you can punish yourself for all your failings. A dog, a harmless, innocent, unself-conscious dog, is clearly more deserving. But if you are not yet convinced, let us consider another vital issue. Order, chaos, life, death, sin, vision, work, and suffering. That is not enough for the authors of Genesis, not for humanity itself. The story continues, and all its catastrophe and tragedy, and the people involved, that's us, must contend with yet another painful awakening. We are next fated to contemplate morality itself. No, that's not good enough. Yeah, I should clean up the animations that I have for the background. Good and evil. When their eyes are opened, Adam and Eve realize more than just their nakedness and the necessity of toil. They also come to know good and evil, the serpent says, referring to the fruit. For God does know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. What could that possibly mean? What could be left to explore and relate after the vast ground already covered? Well, Simple context indicates that it must have something to do with gardens, snakes, disobedience, fruit, sexuality, and nakedness. It was the last item, nakedness, that finally clued me in. It took years. Dogs are predators, so are cats. They kill things and eat them. It's not pretty, but we'll take them as pets and care for them and give them their medication when they are sick, regardless. Why? They are predators, but it's just their nature. They do not bear responsibility for it. They are hungry, not evil. They don't have the presence of mind, the creativity, and above all, the self consciousness necessary for the inspired cruelty of man. Why not? It's simple. Unlike us, predators have no comprehension of their fundamental weakness, their fundamental vulnerability, their own subjugation to pain and death. But we know exactly how and where we can be hurt and why. That is as good a definition as any of self consciousness. We are aware of our own defenselessness, finitude, and mortality. We can feel pain and self disgust and shame and horror, and we know it. We know what makes us suffer. We know how dread and pain can be inflicted on us, and that means we know exactly how to inflict it on others. We know how we are naked and how that nakedness can be exploited. And that means we know how others can be, and that means we know how others are naked and how they can be exploited. We can terrify other people consciously. We can hurt and humiliate them for faults we understand only too well. We can torture them literally, slowly, artfully, and terribly. That's far more than predation. That's a qualitative shift in understanding. That's a cataclysm as large as the development of self consciousness itself. That's the entry of the knowledge of good and evil into the world. That's a second, as yet unhealed fracture in the structure of existence. That's the transformation of being itself into a moral endeavor, all attendant on the development of sophisticated self consciousness. Only man could conceive of the rack, the Iron Maiden, and the thumbscrew. Only man will inflict suffering for the sake of suffering. That is the best definition of evil I have been able to formulate. Animals can't manage that, but humans, with their excruciating, semi-divine capacities, most certainly can. And with this realization, we have well-nigh full legitimization of the idea, very unpopular in modern intellectual circles, of original sin. Well, excuse me for a while. Yes, not here. And who would dare to say that there was no element of voluntary choice in our evolutionary, individual, and theological transformation? Our ancestors chose their sexual partners and they selected for consciousness and self consciousness and moral knowledge. And who can deny the sense of existential guilt that pervades human experience? And who could avoid noting that without that guilt, that sense of inbuilt corruption and capacity for wrongdoing, and a man is one step from psychopathy? Human beings have a great capacity for wrongdoing. It is an attribute that is unique in the world of life. We can and do make things worse voluntarily, with full knowledge of what we are doing, as well as accidentally and carelessly, and in a manner that is willfully blind. Given that terrible capacity, that proclivity of malevolent actions, is it any wonder we have a hard time taking care of ourselves and others, or even that we doubt the value of the entire human enterprise? And we've suspected ourselves, for good reason, for a very long time. Thousands of years ago, uh, in ancient Mesopotamians, and that what sorry about that. Let's try again. Thousands of years ago, the ancient Mesopotamians believed, for example, that mankind itself was made from the blood of Kingu, the single most terrible monster that the great goddess of chaos could produce in her most vengeful and destructive moments. After drawing conclusions such as that, how could we not question the value of our being and even of being itself? Who then could be faced with illness in himself or another without doubting the moral utility of prescribing a healing medicament? And no one understands the darkness of the individual better than the individual himself. Who then, when ill, is going to be fully committed to his own care? Perhaps man is something that should never have been. Perhaps the world should even be cleansed of all human presence, so that being and consciousness could return to the innocent brutality of the animal. I believe that the person who claims never to have wished for such a thing has neither consulted his memory nor confronted his darkest fantasies. What then is to be done? Hmm, okay, it would be the last part of this chapter, so let's go through it. A spark of the divine. In Genesis 1, God creates the world with the divine, truthful word, generating habitable, paradisal order from the pre cosmogenic chaos. He then creates man and woman in his image, imbuing them with the capacity to do the same, to create order from chaos and continue his work. At each stage of creation, including that involving the formation of the first couple, God reflects upon what has come to be and pronounces it good. The juxtaposition of Genesis 1 with Genesis 2 and 3, the latter two chapters outlining the fall of man, describing why our lot is so tragedy ridden and ethically torturous, produces a narrative sequence almost unbearable in its profundity. The moral of Genesis 1 is that being brought into existence through true speech is good. This is true even of man himself prior to his separation from God. This goodness is of man himself prior to his separation from God. Uh, oh, no, sorry. This goodness is terribly disrupted by the events of the fall and of Cain and Abel and the flood and the Tower of Babel. But we retain an intimation of the pre lapsarian state We remember, so to speak. We remain eternally nostalgic for the innocence of childhood, the divine, the unconscious being of the animal, and the untouched cathedral-like old grove forest. We find respite in such things. We worship them even if we are self-proclaimed atheistic environmentalists of the most anti-human sort. Yeah, these happen. The original state of nature, conceived in this manner, is paradisal. But we are no longer one with God and nature, and there is no simple turning back. The original man and woman, existing in unbroken unity with their Creator, did not appear conscious, and certainly not self-conscious. Their eyes were not open, but in their perfection they were also less, not more, than their post-fall counterparts. Their goodness was something bestowed rather than deserved or earned. Their they exercised no choice. God knows that's easier. But maybe that's not better than, for example, goodness genuinely earned. Maybe, even in some cosmic sense, assuming that consciousness itself is a phenomenon of cosmic significance, free choice matters. I can speak with the certainty about such things. I am unwilling to take these questions off the table, however, merely because they are difficult. So, here's a proposition. Perhaps it is not simply the emergence of self-consciousness and the rise of our moral knowledge of death and the fall that besets us and make us doubt our own worth. Perhaps it is instead our unwillingness, reflected in Adam's shamed hiding, to walk with God despite our fragility and propensity for evil. Sounds good to me. The entire Bible is structured so that everything after the fall, the history of Israel, the prophets, the coming of Christ, is presented as a remedy for that fall, a way out of evil. The beginning of conscious history, the rise of the state and all its pathologies of pride and rigidity, are emergence of great moral figures, the emergence of great moral figures who try to set things right, culminating in the Messiah himself. That is all part of humanity's attempt, God willing, to set itself right. And what would that mean? And this is an amazing thing. The answer is already implicit in Genesis 1. To embody the image of God, to speak out of chaos, the being that is good, but to do so consciously of our own free choice. Back is the way forward, as T.S. Eliot so rightfully insisted, but back as awake beings, exercising the proper choice of awake beings instead of back to sleep. Okay, here comes a poem. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree. Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness, between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always. A condition of complete simplicity, costing no less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. When the tongues of flames are enfolded, into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. From Little Gidding, from Four Quarters, written in 1943. If we wish to take care of ourselves properly, we would have to respect ourselves, but we don't, because we are, not least in our own eyes, fallen creatures. If we lived in truth, if we spoke the truth, then we could walk with God once again and respect ourselves and others in the world. And the world. And the world. Yeah. Then we might treat ourselves like people we cared for. We might strive to set the world straight. We might orient it toward heaven, where we would want people we cared for to dwell instead of hell, where our resentment and hatred would eternally sentence everyone. In the areas where Christianity emerged 2000 years ago, people were much more barbaric than they are today. Conflict was everywhere. Human sacrifice, including that of children, was a common occurrence even in technologically sophisticated societies, such as that of ancient Carthage. In Rome, arena sports were competitions to the death, and the spilling of blood was a commonplace. The probability that a modern person in a functional democratic country will now kill or be killed is infinitis uh, infinitesimally low, very low, yeah, compared to what it was in previous societies, and still is, in the unorganized and anarchic parts of the world. Then the primary moral issue confronting society was control of violent, impulsive selfishness and the mindless greed and brutality that accompanies it. People with those aggressive tendencies still exist. At least now they know that such behavior is suboptimal, and either try to control it or encounter major social obstacles if they don't. But now also, another problem has arisen, which was perhaps less common in our harsher past. It is easy to believe that people are arrogant and egotistical and always looking out for themselves. The cynicism that makes that opinion a universal truism is widespread and fashionable. But such an orientation to the world is not at all characteristic of many people. They have the opposite problem. They shoulder intolerable. Yeah, they shoulder intolerable burdens of self-disgust, self-contempt, shame, and self-consciousness. Thus, instead of narcissistically inflating their own importance, they don't value themselves at all, and they don't take care of themselves with attention and skill. It seems that people often don't really believe that they deserve the best care, personally speaking. They are excruciatingly aware of their own faults and inadequacies, real and exaggerated, and ashamed and doubtful of their own value. They believe that other people shouldn't suffer, and they will work diligently and altruistically to help them alleviate it. They extend the same courtesy even to the animals they are acquainted with, but not so easily to themselves. It is true that the idea of virtuous self-sacrifice is deeply embedded in Western culture, at least insofar as the West has been influenced by Christianity, which is based on the imitation of someone who performed the ultimate act of self-sacrifice. Any claim that the golden rule does not mean sacrifice yourself for others might therefore appear dubious. But Christ's archetypal death exists as an example of how to accept finitude, betrayal, and tyranny heroically. How to walk with God despite the tragedy of self conscious knowledge. And not as a directive to victimize ourselves in the service of others. To sacrifice ourselves to God, to the highest good, if you like, does not mean to suffer silently and willingly when some person or organization demands more from us consistently than is offered in return. That means we are supporting tyranny and allowing ourselves to be treated like slaves. This is not virtuous to be victimized by a bully, even if that bully is oneself. I learned two very important lessons from Carl Jung, the famous Swiss depth psychologist, about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, or loving your neighbor as yourself. The first lesson was that neither of these statements has anything to do with being nice. The second was that both are equations rather than injunctions. If I am someone's friend, a family member, or a lover, then I am morally obliged to bargain as hard on my own behalf as they have on theirs. If I fail to do so, I will end up a slave, and the other person a tyrant. What good is that? It is much better for any relationship when both partners are strong. Furthermore, there is little difference between standing up and speaking for yourself when when you're being bullied or otherwise tormented and enslaved, and standing up and speaking for someone else. As Jung points out, this means embracing and loving the sinner who is yourself as much as forgiving and aiding someone else who is stumbling and imperfect. As God himself claims, so goes the story, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. According to this philosophy, you do not simply belong to yourself. You are not simply your own possession to torture and mistreat. This partly because your being is inexorably tied up with that of others, and your mistreatment of yourself can have catastrophic consequences for others. This is this is most clearly evident, perhaps, in the aftermath of suicide, when those left behind are often both bereft and traumatized. But metaphorically speaking, there is also this. You have a spark of the divine in you, which belongs not to you, but to God. We are, after all, according to Genesis, made in His image. We have the semi-divine capacity of consciousness. Our consciousness participates in the speaking forth of being. We are a low-resolution, kenoic version of God. We can make order from chaos and vice versa in our way with our words. So we may not exactly be God, but we are not exactly nothing either. In my own periods of darkness in the underworld of the soul, I found myself frequently overcome and amazed by the ability of people to befriend each other, to love their intimate partners and parents and children, and to do what they must do to keep the machinery of the world turning. I knew a man, injured and disabled by a car accident, who was employed by a local utility. For years after the crash, he worked side by side with another man for his part, suffered with a degenerative neurological disease. They cooperated while repairing the lines, each making up for the other's inadequacy. This sort of everyday heroism is the rule, I believe, rather than the exception. Most individuals are dealing with one or more serious health problems while going productively and uncomplainingly about their business. If anyone is fortunate enough to be in a rare period of grace and health personally, then he or she typically has at least one close family member in crisis. Yet people prevail and continue to do difficult and effortful tasks to hold themselves and their families and society together. To me, this is miraculous. So much of that so much so that a dumbfounded gratitude is the only appropriate response. There are so many ways that things can fall apart or fail to work altogether, and it is always wounded people that are holding it together. They deserve some genuine and heartfelt admiration for that. It's an ongoing miracle of fortitude and perseverance. In my clinical practice, I encourage people to credit themselves and those around them for acting productively and with care, as well for as well as for the genuine concern and thoughtfulness they manifest towards others. People are so tortured by the limitations and constraints of being that I am amazed they ever act properly or look beyond themselves at all. But enough. Enough do so that we have central heat and running water and infinite computational power. No, it's not infinite. And electricity, and enough of everyone to enough for everyone to eat, and even the capacity to contemplate the fate of uh, broader society and nature, terrible nature itself. All that complex machinery that protects us from freezing and starving and dying from lack of water tends unceasingly towards malfunction through entropy. And it is only the constant attention of careful people that keeps it working so unbelievably well. Some people degenerate into the hell of resentment and the hatred of being, but most refuse to do so. Despite their suffering and disappointments and losses and inadequacies and ugliness. And again, that is a miracle for those with the eyes to see it. Humanity in toto, and those who compose it as identifiable people deserve some sympathy for the appalling burden under which the human individuality genuinely staggers. Some sympathy for subjugation to moral vulnerability, tyranny of the state, and the depredations of nature. It is an existential situation that no mere animal encounters or endures, and one of severity such that it would and one of severity such that it would take a god to fully bear it. It is this sympathy that should be the proper medicament for self-conscious self-contempt. Uh, which has its justification, but is only half the full and proper story. Hatred for self and mankind must be balanced with gratefulness for tradition and the state and astonishment at what normal, everyday people accomplish, to say nothing of the staggering achievement of the truly remarkable. We deserve some respect. You deserve some respect. You are important to other people as much as to yourself. You have some vital role to play in the unfolding destiny of the world. You are therefore morally obliged to take care of yourself. You should take care of, help, and be good to yourself the same way you would take care of, help, and be good to someone you loved and valued. You may therefore have to conduct yourself habitually in a manner that allows you some respect for your own being. And fair enough. But every person is deeply flawed. Everyone falls short of the glory of God. In that stark, if that's if that stark fact meant, however, that we had no responsibility to care for ourselves as much as others, everyone would be brutally punished all the time. That would be no good. That would not be good. That would make the shortcomings of the world, which can make everyone who thinks honestly question. Hold on. That would make the shortcomings of the world, which can make everyone who thinks honestly question the very propriety of the world, worse in every way. That simply cannot be the proper path forward. To treat yourselves to treat yourself as if you were someone you are responsible for helping is instead to consider what would be truly good for you. This is not what you want. It is also not what would make you happy. Every time you give a child something sweet, you make that child happy. That does not mean that you should do nothing for children except feed them candy. Happy is by no means synonymous with good. You must get children to brush their teeth. They must put on their snowsuits when go outside in the cold, even though they might object strenuously. You must help a child become a virtuous, responsible, awake being, capable of full reciprocity, able to take care of themselves and others, and to thrive while doing so. Why would you think it acceptable to do anything less for yourself? You need to consider the future and think, what might my life look like if I were caring for myself properly? What career would challenge me and render me productive and helpful so that I could shoulder my share of the load and enjoy the consequences? What should I be doing when I have some freedom to improve my health, expand my knowledge, and strengthen my body? You need to know where you are so you can start to chart your course. You need to know who you are so that you understand your armament and bolster yourself in respect to your limitations. You need to know where you are going so that you can limit the extent of chaos in your life, restructure order, and bring the divine force of hope to bear on the world. You must determine where you are going so that you can bargain for yourself, so that you don't end up resentful, vengeful, and cruel. You have to articulate your own principles so that you can defend yourself against others taking inappropriate advantage of you, and so that you are secure and safe while you work and play. You must discipline yourself carefully. You must keep the promises you make to yourself and reward yourself so that you can trust and motivate yourself. You need to determine how to act toward yourself so that you are most likely to become and to stay a good person. It would be good to make the world a better place. Heaven, after all, will not arrive of its own accord. We will have to work to bring it about and strengthen ourselves so that we can withstand the deadly angels and flaming sword of judgment that God used to bar its entrance. Don't underestimate the power of vision and direction. These are irresistible forces able to transform what might appear to be unconquerable obstacles into traversable pathways and expanding opportunities. Strengthen the individual. Start with yourself. Take care with yourself. Define who you are. Refine your personality. Choose your destination and articulate your being. As the great 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche so brilliantly noted, he whose life has a why can bear almost any how. You could help direct the world on its careering trajectory a bit more toward heaven and a bit more away from hell. Once having understood hell, researched it, so to speak, particularly your own individual hell, you could decide against going there or creating that. You could aim elsewhere. You could, in fact, devote your life to this. That would give you a meaning with a capital M. That would justify your miserable existence. That would atone for your sinful nature and replace your shame and self consciousness with the natural pride and forthright confidence of someone who has learned once again to walk with God in the garden. You could begin by treating yourself as if you were someone you were responsible for helping. Okay, that would be the end of the chapter 2. The next one will be make friends with people who want the best for you. Okay, that sounds pretty undeniable. Okay. So, hmm. Yeah, I hope that you will enjoy this read through and that it will help you to improve your life and the world around you. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Hopefully soon. Bye.